Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thanks so much. Well, I really appreciate being able to come and kind of engage with fellow educators at this conference. I'm Sara Kuruvilla. I'm a associate professor in the Department of Oncology at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western University in Ontario, Canada. I have no conflicts of interest, and at the end of this, I hope that I have been able to communicate a Canadian perspective in terms of elucidating a role for real-world evidence in medicine and research, describe some emerging paradigm shifts in terms of where the field is going, some curricular gaps that relate to it, and also review a longitudinal program we've been trying to establish at our site. So when I talk, just to start from a background perspective, when we talk to medical students and health science students about clinical decision making, we talk to them about the importance of the clinical question and the importance of the information that that we harness to make those clinical questions. We may ask questions about background of the disease. We may ask questions that are more specific to the patient that is sitting in front of us, such as, what to do about treating them in the best way, or how to make the diagnosis the best and most non-invasive way, or how to maybe prevent this disease. And often in those questions, we have to depend on a relatively higher quality evidence that is, towards the upper part of this pyramid, which is, a pyramid that depicts the levels of evidence in terms of information that we use to make those clinical decisions. And I kind of want to bring to your attention the randomized control trial, which is where we have historically put a lot of emphasis. If it's a randomized control trial, we feel we can believe it more than maybe a cohort study or a case control study, because it generally, allows to minimize bias because of the randomization function. It's also generally, a very specific question in a very specific cohort of patients with specific intervention, looking at a specific outcome designed to address a specific question. So if we have that question, we can generally be quite confident we have a good answer, to that question. Although it's in the third tier, it's what actually feeds the first and the second tier. So if you have a good group of randomized controlled trials, you'll have good quality systematic reviews and meta-analysis. If you have not very well conducted trials, or if you don't have very good randomized trials or even no trials there, you can't do a good systematic review or meta-analysis. But for other questions such as harm or prognosis, we may depend on the lower qualities of evidence, simply because there isn't a way for us to get that information from a randomized control trial. So the randomized control trial has been the core, has been considered the crown of information that we need to, if we can get that, that's the best level of information. However, there's an increasing recognition with the increase in the availability of data related to healthcare systems and patient data, as well as in the exponential rise in the tools we can use to harness and understand this data, an increasing recognition that perhaps cohort studies or observational studies might also provide some meaningful information. And in fact, there is some research now that suggests that real-world evidence studies, so that's observational studies in this clinical context, actually may have some advantages. It definitely complements what we get from the narrow real randomized control trial data, but it may actually have some advantages, such as what do patients who don't fit into that clinical trial actually, what really happens to them in the real world? Or what about rare side effects that were not evident in the small number of patients that were treated in the randomized controlled trial, but when we put them out into the large populations of thousands of patients, maybe you'll find that rare side effect. Or how about actual taking of the a drug, for instance, in a trial?
Sorry, can I interrupt you for 1 second? I'm sorry. The other gentleman, your screen is on and we can hear you talking while the presenter is providing her presentation materials. Can you mute yourself, please, out of respect for her presentation?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. So, in a randomized control trial, patients are asked to bring back diaries, the pills are counted. So we know that they're taking their medications as they should. But in the real world, no one's doing that. So what if patients are not really taking medications as they should? Will that medicine really have the effect that a clinical trial says it has? So those have become increasingly important questions as we look at effectiveness of treatment. And in fact, in the subfield of oncology, cancer itself is recognized as a large group of diseases. It's not just one disease, but depending on where it happens, site of origin, histology, molecular signatures, it might behave very differently to different therapies, might have a very different prognosis, etc. The other problem, of course, is that is one area of a medicine where survival remains poor despite all of the research that is being done and all of the randomized trials that are being done in that field. So the question, has started to arise, really, how much value do clinical trials afford in the real world setting? Because remember, regulators use clinical trial data to say whether a treatment can be approved for a population or not. And so, is that the only focus that we should have, or, are there other ways to maybe harness real world evidence to actually improve outcomes for patients, complement the information we get in terms of the real world, randomized control trial in terms of regulating and approving drugs for patients? And is there data we can get to improve health systems in general? And so there has been a paradigm shift in medicine over the last several years where healthcare decision makers and clinicians are starting to recognize RWE as an important role. And in fact, enough so that there has been some global consensus in this regard. The European Medicines Agency, as well as the FDA in the US, the Health Canada, have all gone on to put together a memorandum of understanding and a joint statement on international collaboration to enable real-world evidence in a proper way, in a scientifically sound way. And there's lots of frameworks that are being built to establish, the proper way in which research should be conducted, how it should be read, etc. Adding to all of this that's happening in the regulatory and the clinical environment, we also have to, put, sort of also consider the swaths of data that we didn't have in the past, but that we have now. For instance, now there's, a lot, so there's the electronic medical health records, lots more of that being used and data being available for use. There are biobanks, there are patient-reported outcomes. There are variables that patients use that might detect how much activity they have, what their oxygen levels are, what their blood pressure is. There are a lot of administrative databases that look at admissions, discharges, so bad and good outcomes for patients, survival, all of those things. So there's a lot of data out there. So we have to also figure out what data is really to be used in a particular situation or to address this particular question. What is the quality of the data in the repositories that we're going to be using to address that question? How do we assess the quality? What kind of databases do we go to for different types of research questions? So these are all things that also need to be understood by the research community, the medical community, and then also be provided in terms, and also be, provided in terms of education of the next generation of healthcare providers. So this is where there's a huge gap in our curriculum as we sort of grapple with how do we deal with this data? What do we know about this data? What about these new pots of data that are coming? How good are they? Do we need to establish a consensus on how to actually, what quality should be in this setting? Now, when we think about, so I teach medical students, and when we think about medical students, the Royal College has put together a few framework approaches. We have to make sure we align our curriculum with the framework that they have put forward as being necessary to train good healthcare providers. So our students should be a medical expert. They should be good at they should be good communicators, collaborators, leaders, health advocates, scholars, professional in their ways, as well as concerned about patient safety and quality improvement. So whenever we develop a curriculum, we also have to pay attention to make sure that our curriculum is developed using those tools. Now, so the other piece with medical education is there are several gaps, and medical education, heavily seems to rely on theory more than the practice of research. And that's partly because historically, because randomized clinical trials have always been the type of research we wanted to do that's high quality. There was just never enough time to get a trainee through the full life cycle of that trial, because it takes a few years to start up a trial, then it takes several years to accrue patients, then it takes several years to understand the outcomes and report on it. By then, the trainee has already finished medical school, has gone on to a career somewhere else. So it's always been heavy on theory. But with the advent of the real world evidence type research, there is an opportunity to ground students, whether they're medical students or science students, in the full life cycle of the research project within the duration of their course. And the other piece is there's really no iteratively developed structured programs that embed real world data that we can get from our patients to understand what's happening to them or to the system, or generate real world evidence. So our hope was to really start with kind of developing a program, the following objective, really with the goal being to prepare students for a data-driven healthcare system. That is what is coming down their way when they start to practice, but to give them the technical skills in terms of hands-on experience with every bit the full life cycle of this research process, develop scholarly skills as well as they go along, and also develop professional, provide opportunities for professional development in terms of opportunities for research, presentations, publications, all aligned with the CanMEDS competencies. And so, so this is what we sort of thought we would develop, at least start up in our corner of the country. So, our program had these following components. We developed modules that would help with orientation to provide students with the basic foundations of this kind of research. What is RWE? What are the ethical considerations? What are database structures? Aligning with the scholar and professional attributes of the CanMEDS roles. Then we would take them through data abstraction and entry, where they would go through the actual process of chart review, first through test case, test data, and then on real, in terms of, real patients who had consented, or retrospective chart reviews. We would, look at training them in terms of whether the variables they're extracting actually provide valid, answers to the variables that are being asked in the database. What is the accuracy of their data entry, etc. And this was a teamwork, because we had multiple students working on the same project at the same time, so they'd be able to collaborate and learn from each other as well. We also then wanted to engage them with data quality and management principles. How do you clean a data set? How do you do error checking? How do you use principles of imputation, etc.? Then once they had mastered those areas somewhat, we would allow them to go with formulating in a guided manner an appropriate clinical question, and to see if that is something that they could address through the database that they were trying to build up. We would encourage them to submit their questions if once they had formulated it and had sufficient data to be analyzed, to abstracts at our medical school, at our oncology research days, but also if it was high enough quality, then to try and put it through to the regional and national conferences and international conferences, even if possible, to get through to, to develop abstracts and manuscripts. We, throughout this all, they were provided regular mentorship and supervision, both by by the faculty, but also by team leaders and amongst peers themselves, to allow them to develop their skills further. So in terms of the setting, this is a map of Canada, and as you can see, although it looks pretty large, most of the concentration is concentrated right in the south there. And Ontario, which is highlighted in the yellow, is actually one of the more populated, one of the more populous provinces of the country. And the small square there reflects this region that is then blown out. This is the southwest region. It's a pretty large region in terms of the catchment and the population that it serves. And the London Health Sciences Centre and the Western University are right there in the middle, serving this larger population. In terms of some preliminary outcomes from this, early project, which is really meant to be, I'm not able to go. Yeah, a feasibility project, a phase 1 of this project. Over the last 5 years, we had 11 students enrolled, not a large amount, but it's a very rarefied group of students that come to us. They had 2 to 3 to 4 years in terms of their core courses, so they stayed with us over the period of that time. Selection, because this was the feasibility type of a project, we wanted to just open this up to any students who were interested in oncology research, data-based type studies. And we had a spectrum of students that came across preclinical medical students all the way through medical students, master's students, and PhD students. And to us, as we tried to learn some lessons from this feasibility project, we kind of got a sense that this was a program that we could really adapt to different types of students and learners. In terms of some of the other program outputs, in addition to the students that came and stayed with us longitudinally, over the 2 to 4 years of their engagement with us, these students, just 11 of them, and inputted about thousands of charts into the database. All of these charts, we were looking at very granular data, so about maybe close to 300 to 400 variables. So they were able to do that. They were able to develop, as we went with them along this journey, we saw that they were able to get better with their data management skills, hypothesis generation, analytical skills. They were able to, actually, they got very early on, even ahead of time, in terms of their curriculum, they were able to get some really practical learnings about the field of medicine and oncology in particular. They developed strong ethics and leadership abilities, and they have actually presented at not just local and regional conferences, which is what we were initially expecting. They've gone on to present at national and international conferences. And in fact, this weekend, one of our students is presenting at the European Society of Medical Oncology on a project that he started with us 2 years ago. So it's been very rewarding to see the career advancement of these students within their own, courses. They've also started to learn about how authorship works and, what the guidelines are that we use. And sorry for the mistake, but it's ICMJE, not R, in terms of the guidelines. And the one thing that we were really heartened from a program point of view was that the program was sustainable. And in fact, we did, and I'll come into why that was quite evident for us. In terms of some of the competencies that they did gain technical skills in terms of handling, identifying the relevant variables, handling missing data, quality control proficiencies. They got analytical skills fairly early on. This is something that often our trainees following medical school, when they get into residency and even into fellowship, that's where they may start developing some of these skills. But our medical students and our pre-med students who have these skills in terms of hypothesis generation, basic statistical skills, critical appraisal. So that was very rewarding. It was also great to see how they developed professionally. Everyone wanted to be the first author at the first, when we first started it out. But once we went through the authorship rules and, kind of helped them understand these concepts, they were pretty good with where they felt they fit in terms of the authorship accountability process. Very collaborative. And eventually I thought we did develop this program aligned with the CanMEDS roles that we were hoping to, when we started. In terms
I'll
of
let you know you're at 22 minutes now. So
sorry, I'll just wrap up very quickly. In terms of long-term outcomes, the one thing I wanted, I mean, several of our students have gone on to masters and other programs. They've gone on to oncology-related disciplines. They've found that their experience with us has helped them to land good, programs. But also the fact that several of them have stayed with us despite the fact that they've graduated from their core courses and have gone on to other universities and cities, and they still continue to engage with us. And this has been very rewarding. I think in terms of strength, we've been able to demonstrate that we can help students with practical experience, full research, get them through the full research cycle, improve, their quality and provide them with tangible output. But we have faced challenges such as funding, we have to develop formalized assessment tools. We have to balance this with the scheduling in terms of the students' own other competing commitments. But despite these challenges, I think we've still been able to demonstrate feasibility and sustainability. The distinctiveness of this program is that in comparison with existing models, we have been able to generate a practical model that is not, and not just a theoretical model. And, where the students are not just learning about RWE, but they're generating it. Our next steps are to scale this up, probably see if we can integrate this into the medical curriculum as a more formalized longitudinal research stream, develop partnerships across the country, as well as with other institutions, as well as with industry, maybe to help our funding issues, and also to, publish together with other institutions in terms of outcomes and best practices. So with this, I just, leave it out to you for questions. My hope is that this is a program that will help both the students as well as the healthcare system. Thank you.
thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Sorry.